Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with some more of the Great War, and we are on to week 20, the battle at the Falkland Islands and the death of Maximilian von Spee. Yeah. Nothing, actually, the typical announcement that I do at the beginning of every video. Make sure you go check out the links below in the description box or in my pinned comment in the comment section. Would love it if you joined the Discord. Share some history memes, recommend some history books. Maybe you might add a general recommend book section instead of just history book as well. Oh, history. Maybe some history. Maybe a history games section too. I don't know. I'm shutting up now. Dive in.
The 50 years prior to the war had seen military medicine advance more slowly than other branches of science. And without antibiotics, gangrene was a massive killer, but only one among many. Bullets, disease, drowning, murders of civilians, and more. And as winter began and the carnage continued, scenes of the worst horror imaginable were now not only very much real, they were everyday happenings. My name's Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. Last week, we saw the Austrians, with German help, pushing back the Russian Colossus. Further south in the Balkans, other Austrians had taken Belgrade, but were now on the run. The British Indian troops were nearing Kourna in the Middle East, and on the Western Front, it was unusually quiet after the interminable battles of the autumn. The Western Front wasn't especially quiet this week, though, as the British and French made attacks that didn't have any specific physical goal, but were intended to tie down German forces and prevent them from being transferred to the Eastern Front to fight the Russians. German Chief of Staff Falkland had committed to sending 3 divisions from west to east, but refused to send more, even though General Ludendorff in the east repeatedly asked for them. In November, Ludendorff had launched a preemptive offensive against the Russians that had resulted in the Battle of Lodz, a truly colossal engagement with over 500,000 troops involved.
Damn.
This attack had ruined Russian plans for an invasion of Germany, but the Germans had been unable to take the city itself, which was a well-supplied strategic railway center. This week, they tried again, and after a series of frontal assaults using those 3 transferred divisions, managed to capture Lodz on December 6th. The Germans advanced another 50 kilometers before they came up against Russian troops that had dug themselves into trenches. The Germans dug in as well, and as winter came on in force, we see the whole center section of the Eastern Front frozen, physically and militarily. It would remain so until the summer of 1915. But if things seemed stalled in the east and the west, they were anything but that in the south. The Austrians seemed to have the Serbs beaten only a week ago when they took the Serbian capital, but incredibly, only a few days later, the Serbs had the Austrian army on the run. The Austrians had fallen back to Valjevo, but the Serbs managed to surround them there, and in just a few days of
Austria-Hungary. How the fuck do you get surrounded by a nation the fraction of your size? With the fraction of your people. The incompetence of the Austro-Hungarian military, dude. Oh my god.
Fighting had taken over 20,000 Austrian prisoners. By December 10th, most of the remaining Austrian soldiers had left the country. Belgrade held out for a few more days, but on December 15th, the Serbian High Command issued a proclamation that stated, "Not one enemy soldier remains at liberty on the soil of the Serbian kingdom." This was an enormous defeat for the Austrians and an equally enormous victory for Serbia. It was a huge blow to Austrian pride and confidence. I mean, if they couldn't beat Serbia, what would happen against Russia? And for Serbia, it meant being in the news headlines all over the world. The result was political and humanitarian aid, and people from around the world even coming to fight for the underdog. But there was a cost. The Serbs had suffered over 100,000 casualties in just a few weeks, and the Austrian defeat certainly wasn't irreversible. Serbia had drained her forces down to the last dreg to beat the Austrians, and the country was devastated. Whole towns were emptied and refugees roamed the blasted countryside. And one other thing often overlooked, Serbia was now linked to the world by only a single-track railway to Salonika in neutral Greece, through which all supplies had to be transported painfully slowly.
Oh, God.
Disease was rampant throughout the country. Cholera, typhus, and dysentery killed thousands, and the poverty and misery would only get worse. In the First World War, over 60% of Serbian men between the ages of 15 and 55 would die.
Oh. 60%? of the adult male population. Ooh.
As for the Austrians, General
How the fuck are they still a nation after that? God damn.
Oskar Potiorek was finally relieved of his command for incompetence, since by the end of the
About
year,
time.
his army had suffered close to 300,000 casualties out of a total deployment of 450,000. But
Gee. What
Konrad
the-
von Hotzendorf was still chief of staff, in spite of the fact that against both Russian and Serb, his operations had pretty much uniformly ended in disaster. Another far more successful commander did meet his end this week, though, on December 8th, at the Battle of the Falklands. A few weeks ago, at the Battle of Coronel, German Admiral von Spee had given the British their first defeat at sea for 100 years, sinking 2 cruisers and taking 1,600 lives. The outraged British had subsequently redeployed their forces to try to intercept Spee wherever he went. The Japanese Navy had repositioned units to help, and 2 British battle
Oh wait, this is the guy that was like terrorizing the East Indies, right?
cruisers, the Invincible and the Inflexible, had been sent to the South Atlantic. Spee was being hunted in the Indian, the Pacific, and the Atlantic Oceans, and this week he made the mistake of attacking the Falkland Islands, arriving at Port
Absolute
Stanley on
fucking
December
madman.
8th, which the battlecruiser squadron had also decided to visit. The battlecruisers were stronger and faster than any of Spee's ships, and though Spee tried to run and eventually turned to fight, his ships were destroyed, with 2,200 German sailors, including Spee himself, dying against only 10 British. Only the Dresden got away, and she would spend the next 3 months hiding in the sub-Antarctic waters around Cape Horn until cornered and forced to scuttle. This battle marked the end of the high seas activity of the German Navy. After this, surface fighting was limited to landlocked waters like the Black Sea, the Baltic, or the Adriatic. One area of the world that was really heating up, though, was the Middle East, where the British Indian Army won the Battle of Qorna, where the Ottomans had retreated after their losses at Fao and Basra. Thing is, the British had pretty much secured their coastal oil production with those battles, but the Ottoman defenses had been quite weak, so they'd moved further inland. Qorna, though, which is supposed to be a possible site of the Garden of Eden, was anything but good as a base. Endless winds stirred up clouds of dust, and the floodplain meant that when you dug trenches, they just filled with water. Bad water, bad sanitation, the total lack of communication except along the Tigris and Euphrates, and endless small raids by the local Arab population further complicated things. And you could really see that this campaign was going to be no picnic for anybody. The British also now began to wonder how strong the enemy was actually going to be, and just how big was the threat to the oil fields. In other foreshadowing news, we see that the mobilization of Russian students began December 1st. This provided many more soldiers, but also gave Bolshevik student activists access to the army. Of course, when hundreds of thousands of your men are dying, eventually you need to recruit more, whether too old or too young to traditionally serve. And one thing to consider too, though so many troops of all ages died, even more were taken as prisoners of war. The ICRC, the Red Cross, arranged visits to POW camps in all of the warring nations, and they determined that the Germans, French, and British were following humanitarian guidelines for military POWs, but not the Russians or the Austrians. Now, we've already mentioned before that many Austrian officers took pride in the atrocities committed in the Serbian campaign. But John Reed, an American war correspondent, was at this point traveling through the Balkans getting material.
Oh, he died young. 87 to 20? Did he die from the Spanish flu? What, that'd be 33 years old. Hold on, quick math. 97. 07, 7, yeah, 33, I can do that.
For his soon-to-be published book, which would confirm for Allied readers the barbarism of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, such as a photograph Reed was shown from Leknica showing over 100 women and children chained together whose heads had been cut off. But as awful and shocking as scenes like that may be, they really were just a drop in the bucket. Think of life on the front lines in the West, for example. First off, the destruction from artillery fire from miles away, a huge belt of land littered with corpses, farms and villages now just blackened masonry, the fields and trees destroyed, and the bodies of horses, cattle, and sheep scattered throughout, dismembered, abandoned or starving, while the wounded men and animals cried
I think my breakfast is gonna come up.
out endlessly in pain. Thousands more die of disease or rot in the mud and rain. The conditions would only worsen as the winter came on. And winter was coming on all over Europe. And at the end of the week, we still see sporadic fighting in Flanders, the Germans being stopped by the Russians and settling in, the Austrians being expelled from underdog Serbia, the German Pacific Navy destroyed, and the British again victorious in the Middle East. It's 2 weeks to Christmas. With all the battle talk and maps and strategy, it's very easy to overlook what was going on an individual level in the war. And I'd like to end this week with a quote, a scene of horror from 1914, recounted by Alois Lowenstein. Quote, "Among a bunch of corpses lay 3 wounded Frenchmen. One man had both legs shattered.
Oh.
The second's stomach was torn open. The third had tried to shoot himself until one of our chaps took away his revolver. He fired twice at his own head to escape pain, but aimed clumsily, a little too high. The skull cap was uplifted, and he moaned in a fashion to melt the heart. Another man lay apparently dead, but with one leg still twitching, like that of a partridge that is unable to die." End quote. This was modern war. Now, if you've recently started watching our series and you're wondering how this whole war began, you should check out our 3-part Prelude to War.
We don't need that. We know how the war began. And that was the battle at the Falkland Islands, the death of Maximilian von Spee. The Great War, Week 20. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button. Hit that like button, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.